Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The first time I noticed her eyes, really noticed them, was one summer afternoon when my mother had invited her friends over for tea. I had always known Claire as nothing more than Mom's friend, the woman with the soft voice, the neat hair and the perfume that lingered faintly in the hallway after she left. She was older than me, of course, closer to my mother's age, but there was something about her presence that always pulled the air around her tighter, like she carried her own gravity. That afternoon, while the women sat in the living room gossiping, I passed through to grab a glass of water. Claire's gaze followed me, and I caught her eyes before I could look away. They weren't the polite eyes of my mother's friends, the kind that glanced at me with quick smiles before continuing their chatter. No, Claire's eyes lingered. They searched, held, and spoke something I couldn't quite name. I looked away quickly, but the moment burned itself into my mind. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. She was just being kind, curious, maybe even maternal. But then it happened again. Every time Claire came by, her eyes found mine. Across the room, over the rim of a teacup, through the garden window where I was pretending to read a book. She would look at me like she knew something I didn't. And slowly, dangerously, I began to wonder if she did. One evening, my mother had gone to bed early after dinner, leaving Claire and me in the kitchen, still finishing our wine. It had been a casual visit, but somehow the night stretched longer than expected. Claire leaned against the counter, swirling the deep red liquid in our glass, her eyes fixed on me again. "You've grown up so much," she said softly, almost to herself. The words were harmless, but the way she said them wasn't. My chest tightened as I tried to smile. "I guess time doesn't stop for anyone," I said. Her lips curved just slightly, the kind of smile that wasn't about the words we were exchanging, but about something under them, unspoken. Then she asked, "Do you ever feel like people don't see you for who you really are?" I froze. That was exactly how I felt most days, invisible in my own home, drifting in the background of everyone else's lives. I nodded, surprised she could read me so easily. She didn't look away. Her eyes softened, like she had been carrying the same loneliness for years. That night after she left, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw hers. Not just looking at me, but pulling me closer. It started small, tiny exchanges that anyone else would miss. A brush of her hand against mine when she passed the plate at dinner. A look held too long when my mother was turned away. A faint smile that felt like a secret between just the two of us. Each moment chipped away at the wall I tried to keep up. One rainy afternoon, I was in the backyard, trying to fix the old shed door. My clothes were soaked, and my frustration was boiling over when Claire appeared, umbrella in hand. She had stopped by unexpectedly to drop something off for my mother, but Mom wasn't home. "You'll catch a cold out here," she said, her voice carrying over the rain. She stepped closer, holding the umbrella above me too. Her perfume mixed with the smell of wet earth, and I felt dizzy standing so close. I laughed nervously. "Guess I'm not very good at this kind of thing." Her hand reached up to brush the wet hair off my forehead, lingering just a moment too long. "You're better at more important things," she whispered, her eyes locking with mine. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her, but suddenly the space between us vanished. Her lips touched mine, soft at first, testing, hesitant. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, searching mine for regret, but I didn't step away. I leaned in again, and this time she didn't hold back. The rain fell harder, but under her umbrella, the world disappeared. From that day, nothing was the same. We found stolen moments wherever we could. Late-night conversations in the dimly lit kitchen, her hand brushing mine under the table while my mother laughed in the next room, whispered goodbyes at the door that lingered into something more. Every look, every touch carried the weight of what we shouldn't be doing, but also the undeniable truth of what we both felt. Claire told me things she never told my mother, how her marriage had ended years ago, how she had built walls around herself to survive, how she had forgotten what it was like to feel wanted. And I told her about my loneliness, about the quiet ache of never truly being seen. She listened, she understood, and in her arms I felt a belonging I had never known. But the more we fell into each other, the heavier the guilt grew. Every time I saw my mother smile at Claire, trusting her completely, it was like a knife twisting. Inside me, Claire felt it too. I could see it in the way her laughter dimmed when my mother hugged her, in the way her hands trembled after she touched me. We were caught in something too, powerful to walk away from and too dangerous to keep. Nights were spent in passion and tenderness, mornings in silence and fear. And yet, no matter how much we promised to stop, the pull of her eyes always brought us back. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Claire stood in the hallway with tears in her eyes. "This can't go on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's wrong. It's so wrong. But I don't know how to let you go." I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Then don't." Her breath hitched, and when her lips found mine again, it wasn't just desire, it was desperation love, and the unshakable truth that we belonged to each other, even if the world would never allow it. And that was the night I realized. It had all started with her eyes. Eyes that didn't just look at me, but saw me. Eyes that told a different story, one that would change both of our lives forever. The nights grew longer after that, and I stopped pretending that sleep could come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel her touch, her voice, the heat of her breath on my skin. It was dangerous, reckless, and yet I craved it with every part of me. Claire had become more than a secret. She was the pulse of my days, the fire I didn't know I had been missing until she lit it. We found excuses to see each other. Sometimes it was something simple. She would drop by in the morning with pastries for my mother, but her eyes would flick toward me in a way that made my chest tighten. Other times, my mother would ask me to run errands with Claire, and those drives became our stolen worlds. She would rest her hand on the gear shift and let her fingers brush against mine as if by accident. But we both knew it. single quotes T.1 evening, when my mother was away for a weekend visiting relatives, Claire offered to help me with dinner. We cooked together, the kitchen filled with the smell of roasted garlic and simmering herbs, but beneath it all was the charged silence between us. Her laughter filled the air when I burned the bread, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Like we were something real, something that could exist outside the shadows. After we ate, I caught her looking at me across the table. The candlelight softened her features, but her eyes were sharp, piercing, as if she was memorizing me. I asked her what she was thinking, and she only shook her head, smiling faintly. "That I should have walked away a long time ago," she said, "but now I don't know how." Her words broke something open inside me. I stood, walked around the table, and leaned down until my lips brushed hers. She pulled me into her arms, and the kiss deepened with an urgency we had both been holding back for too long. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The night unfolded slowly, every touch and sigh a confession we had never dared to say out loud. When the morning came, sunlight slipped through the blinds, illuminating her bare shoulder as she lay beside me. She looked peaceful, almost fragile, and I realized then that I loved her. Not the fleeting, reckless kind of love people whispered about, but something deeper, something dangerous because of how real it felt. But reality was always waiting to crash back in. Later that day, my mother returned, oblivious, smiling as Claire hugged her in greeting. I stood there watching, guilt clawing at me so fiercely it made it hard to breathe. Claire didn't meet my eyes once, and I knew she was punishing herself silently, the same way I was. Still, the cycle continued. Every time I told myself it had to end, she would find me, or I would find her, and the pull would be too strong. There was one night, late in autumn, when she came over under the pretense of helping my mother with some garden work. By the time my mother went upstairs for a shower, the two of us were standing too close in the dimly lit backyard, the cool air wrapped around us. "I dream about you," I whispered before I could stop myself. Her breath caught and her hands trembled as she reached up to touch my face. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered back, "because I'll believe you." But she kissed me anyway, and that kiss turned into something that consumed us both. The risk, the thrill, the way we clung to each other as if the world could end in that very moment. It bound us tighter each time. Days blurred into weeks, and every secret moment we shared only deepened the conflict inside. "U.S." She confessed one night that she felt alive again, that before me, she had almost forgotten what it was like to feel wanted. I told her that I'd never felt seen by anyone the way she saw me. And even though the guilt never left us, neither of us could bear the thought of letting go. It couldn't last forever, though. I think we both knew it. Secrets like ours always had an expiration date. But until that day came, we lived in the stolen fragments of time late-night whispers. Hurried touches, desperate kisses that carried both passion and fear. And every time she looked at me, really looked, I knew I was lost. Because those eyes of hers had written a story I could never erase. No matter how it ended, the nights after that autumn evening seemed to stretch into eternity. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with her in my head. The way her lips parted when she whispered my name, the warmth of her hand against my cheek, the way her body melted into mine as if she'd been waiting for me all her life. I couldn't escape it, nor did I want to doubt Claire had become my secret rhythm, the heartbeat underneath everything I did. When I passed her in my mother's living room, pretending to talk casually about the weather or family matters, I would feel the brush of her arm against mine like a spark that burned through every layer of pretense we tried to wear. To anyone else, we were just two people exchanging polite conversation. But beneath the surface, it was war and surrender all at once. One night, when my mother was at a friend's dinner party, Claire came over under the excuse of returning a borrowed dish. The moment the door closed behind her, all the weight of restraint vanished. She dropped the dish on the counter, her eyes already searching for mine, and then she pulled me into her arms like she couldn't breathe without me. We didn't even make it to my room that time. The hallway became our battlefield, our sanctuary, our confessional. The walls heard every secret we couldn't speak in daylight. When we finally collapsed together, tangled and breathless, I remember pressing my forehead to hers and whispering that I was terrified of how much I loved her, terrified of what would happen if anyone ever found out. She only kissed me harder as if to silence the fear. The guilt never left, but it changed. It no longer felt like a barrier. It became part of the intensity, the shadow that made the light brighter. When she laughed in the quiet after, when she traced her fingers over my chest and whispered that she hadn't felt this alive in years, I knew I would burn in the fire for her, no matter the cost. Winter came, and with it, the danger grew. My mother grew suspicious of how often Claire lingered around the house, though she never said it outright. One snowy evening, while my mother was setting the table, Claire brushed past me in the hallway, her hand slipping into mine for just a heartbeat. Before she was gone, that single touch burned hotter than the fire in the hearth, and it drove me nearly mad knowing I couldn't hold her then. Later that night, when the house was quiet, she texted me just one word. Outside. I threw on a coat and slipped out, crunching through the snow to the corner where she waited. She was bundled in a scarf and gloves, but when I saw her eyes shining in the moonlight, none of it mattered. I pulled her close, our breath visible in the cold night air as we kissed under the bare branches, the snow falling softly around us like the world was conspiring to keep our secrets safe. Sometimes I think about leaving everything behind. She whispered against my lips, "Running away, just you and me. Would you come with me?" The question hung between us, heavier than the silence that followed. I didn't answer because I didn't know if it was a fantasy or something she truly meant. But the truth was, I already belonged to her. I had the sense that if she asked again, I would follow her anywhere. The months went on like that, half agony, half ecstasy. We made love in stolen hours, sometimes in our car parked at the edge of town, sometimes in the small guest room at my mother's, when no one else was home. Each time felt like both the first and the last, urgent and tender, desperate and impossibly soft. There was one night, though, that carved itself into my memory more than any other. It was late spring, the air heavy with the smell of rain. She came over, drenched from the storm, and before I could even hand her a towel, she kissed me with a hunger I had never felt from her before. We stumbled upstairs, shedding wet clothes, and the storm outside raged like an echo of what burned inside us. Afterward, we lay together in the dark, her head on my chest, listening to the thunder roll. "I don't regret this," she whispered suddenly. "I should. God knows I should. But I don't. Not for 1 second." I held her tighter, closing my eyes. "Then neither do I." From that night on, something shifted. She stopped hiding the way she looked at me when no one else was watching. I stopped pretending that I could live without her. It was reckless, yes, but it was also the most honest thing either of us had ever known. And so we went on, walking the razor's edge, balancing between destruction and salvation, bound together by a love that should never have been but burned. Too brightly to ever be extinguished, the days blurred into one another as though life outside of her didn't exist. I went through motions with my friends, my family, even myself, but every thought, every stray glance at a clock, every step I took seemed to carry me closer to her. Claire had become more than a secret lover. She was the pulse beneath my skin. The voice in my head when the world was quiet. It was a slow unraveling. My mother would sit across from us at the dining table, pouring tea, talking about her work or about the neighbors, oblivious to the way Claire's foot found mine beneath the tablecloth. Sometimes her fingers would graze my wrist just long enough to ignite a spark before she leaned back and smiled innocently as though nothing had happened. To anyone else, it was nothing. To me, it was everything. We learned how to disguise ourselves in stolen glances. In family gatherings, she'd laugh too brightly at someone else's joke, but her eyes would slip back to me when no one noticed, soft and longing. I learned the map of her body in places no one else dared touch. She learned my voice in whispers that only came alive in the dark. One afternoon when my mother had gone shopping, Claire and I found ourselves in the kitchen together. I had been slicing fruit. She had been putting dishes away, and suddenly the air was too heavy to breathe. She came up behind me, her hand resting lightly on mine, and the knife slipped from my fingers. I turned, and before I knew it, my back was pressed against the counter, her lips crushing against mine. The bowl of fruit tipped, apples rolling across the tiles, but neither of us cared. That was the first time we didn't retreat to the safety of my room or the privacy of her house. That day, we claimed the house itself, our laughter, our gasps, our bodies pressed together in the most dangerous place possible. Afterwards, we sat on the kitchen floor, tangled in each other, the world still spinning from the risk. She rested, her head on my shoulder, her breath shaky. "Do you ever think about the price?" she asked quietly. "Every day," I admitted. "And yet you stay." "I don't know how not to." Her hand tightened around mine, and the silence that followed wasn't filled with regret. It was filled with something heavier, deeper. Love in its most reckless form. The secrecy began to gnaw at us. There were nights she couldn't sneak away when she'd send me a text at midnight, and I'd lie awake, reading her words over and over until dawn. There were afternoons she came by, under the pretense of checking in on my mother, only to slip into the hallway with me for a hurried kiss. The risk of discovery became its own kind of intoxication, a drug that made every moment with her burn hotter. One night, after a family barbecue, I followed her out to the garden when no one was watching. The summer air was thick, the grass damp with evening dew. She was standing by the rose bush, her hair illuminated by the porch light, and when she turned to me, the look in her eyes left me breathless. I crossed the lawn in 2 strides and kissed her as if the world was ending. Her hands slid around my neck, her body melted against mine, and it felt like nothing else mattered, like nothing else had ever mattered. "I don't want to hide anymore," she whispered when we finally pulled apart, her voice trembling but certain. Her words haunted me. For days, I couldn't stop hearing them. Couldn't stop imagining what it would mean to live without lies, without stolen moments. But the reality was heavier. There was my mother. There was her reputation. There was the life she had carefully built that would shatter if anyone knew the truth. And yet, when I looked at her, when I touched her, none of it seemed to matter. The turning point came in late summer. My mother went away for the weekend, leaving the house empty. Claire arrived. Before the sun even set, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. We didn't pretend it was casual. We didn't pretend it was just another stolen moment. We made love slowly, deliberately, like two people who knew they were stepping into a place they could never come back from. Every kiss, every whispered word, every touch was a promise, unspoken but unbreakable. That night, lying together in the quiet of my room, she traced patterns on my chest with her fingertips. "Do you realize what we've done?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered. "And would you do it again?" I turned to face her, meeting her eyes in the darkness. Every single time. She smiled then, a smile that carried both joy and sorrow. She rested her head against me, and I held her until we both drifted into sleep, the world beyond us forgotten. From that moment, everything changed. We no longer told ourselves it was a mistake. We no longer tried to justify it as something fleeting. It was love dangerous, forbidden, but love all the same. And as the days went on, I realized something undeniable. No matter the cost, no matter the destruction that might come, I was already hers. Entirely, irreversibly hers. The weeks that followed blurred into something that felt less like real life and more like a dream I couldn't wake from. Every day was threaded with anticipation, with the weight of stolen glances, the touch of her hand against mine when no one else was looking, the way her perfume lingered in the air long after she had gone. I couldn't sit at the table with my mother without noticing the spark in Claire's eyes when they caught mine, the unspoken language we had created, a language of desire and secrets. It became unbearable to go too long without her. I found excuses to visit her house caring over something my mother had baked, asking for advice on school, or simply pretending I knew to borrow a book. She would answer the door with a smile that was too warm, too knowing, her eyes betraying what her lips couldn't in the open. The moment the door clicked shut, we were in each other's arms, desperate and reckless, our bodies pressed together as though the world outside ceased to exist. One evening, I walked in with the excuse of returning a casserole dish. My mother was out, and Claire opened the door in a simple cotton dress that clung to her like the summer air itself. She barely let me step inside before her lips found mine, urgent and hungry, her hands sliding beneath my shirt as if she couldn't wait. Another second. I pressed her back against the wall, kissing her like I had been starved for weeks, my heart thundering in my chest. The dish nearly slipped from my hand before clattering on the floor. Forgotten as our passion consumed us, we didn't make it upstairs that night. We barely made it past the hallway. Every kiss was fire, every touch a promise we were too afraid to say aloud. Her whispers against my ear were frantic, filled with both need and fear, but none of it stopped us. When she finally collapsed against me, breathless and trembling, she pressed her forehead to mine and whispered my name as though it was both salvation and sin. It wasn't only passion, though. It was the quiet moments that undid me just as much. The times we lay tangled together, her head resting on my chest, her fingers absently drawing patterns on my skin while the world outside passed unnoticed. The moments when she confessed pieces of herself she had never told anyone else, her loneliness, her regrets, the way she had felt unseen even when surrounded by people. She told me once that she hadn't expected love to find her this way, but that she couldn't imagine her life without me now. I held her tighter then, realizing I couldn't either. One afternoon, while my mother dozed in the living room, Claire and I sat together in the garden, pretending to admire the roses. She leaned close under the guise of pointing out a bloom, her breath brushing my cheek. "Tonight," she whispered so softly no one else could hear. "Come to me tonight." That night, I slipped out into the darkness and walked the short distance to her house. The door was already unlocked, waiting for me. When I stepped inside, the lights were low, music playing softly in the background, and Claire was waiting. In the doorway, her eyes filled with something fierce, something that made my chest ache. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. We knew exactly why we were there, what we craved, what we couldn't deny anymore. The night stretched endlessly, every kiss deeper, every touch slower, every whispered word carrying the weight of love that had no safe place to grow. By the time dawn began to creep through the curtains, she was asleep in my arms, her breathing steady, her face serene in a way I'd never seen before. I lay awake, watching her, realizing with terrifying clarity that she wasn't just a secret lover. Anymore, she was everything Dot from that night on. We were inseparable in spirit, even when we couldn't be in body. Every moment apart was an ache, every reunion a fire that consumed us. The secrecy only sharpened the edges of our love, making each kiss, each embrace, each whispered confession feel like it belonged to a world that only we could see. And though I knew the risk, though I knew discovery would destroy everything, I also knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line, one I would never retreat from. Because she wasn't just my mother's friend anymore, she was the woman who had stolen my heart, the woman whose love had rewritten every piece of me, the woman I would risk everything to keep.